In 2024, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of Stephen King's Carrie, the debut novel that kickstarted one of the most historic careers in American fiction. It's truly incredible to think that it's been half a century since Carrie first hit shelves and introduced the world to the King of Horror, a writer whose works have not only defined modern horror, but have also transcended the genre to explore the darkest corners of the human condition. Although I've read a few Stephen King novels over the years, I've never gone back to the beginning. So with Carrie, I'm kicking off a King read-along, where I'll read his books in publication order, just one per month. So if you're interested, I'd love for you to join me. Now, over time, I'd convinced myself that watching the 1976 film adaptation with Sissy Spacek and John Travolta, it gave me everything I needed to know about the novel. After all, the movie is iconic and it sticks closely to the book's plot. But there are definitely enough differences to justify reading it. The experience is a visceral, unsettling journey that digs deeper into the characters, the themes, and the emotions that drive the story. So, with that said, today we're talking about Carrie, its cultural impact, and its enduring relevance, as well as why it remains one of King's most significant works. But before we go any further, I should mention that there will be spoilers. My discussion focuses on some iconic scenes, particularly the prom and its aftermath. So if you're already familiar with these moments from the story, you're going to be fine. But if you'd like to avoid spoilers, you can skip ahead to the why you should read it section. Chances are you know the story by now, but if you don't, I'm going to go over it. Carrie White is a shy, awkward high school girl who is mercilessly bullied by her peers and trapped in a home dominated by her fanatically religious and abusive mother. She's an outcast in every sense of the word, but things take a dramatic turn when Carrie discovers that she has telekinetic powers. These abilities, although initially subtle, they grow stronger as Carrie's pain and anger build, and it sets the stage for a series of horrific events. The story reaches its unforgettable climax at prom night, where a cruel prank involving a bucket of pig's blood triggers Carrie's full telekinetic wrath. What follows is a cascade of destruction. The prom devolves into chaos, the school burns, and Carrie's rage consumes an entire town. This final act isn't just about revenge, it's about the explosive release of years of trauma, and it makes for one of the most iconic and devastating conclusions in modern horror literature. One of the most striking aspects of Carrie is how relevant its depiction of bullying remains, even decades after its publication. Today, the torment Carrie experiences would likely extend beyond the school hallways and into the digital world. In the age of social media, bullying has become relentless and inescapable, often leading to devastating consequences. King's portrayal of Carrie's suffering forces us to reflect on just how little has changed and how cruelty has evolved with technology. This parallel between the fictional events of Carrie and the ongoing tragedies in schools across America is hard to ignore. Headlines today often tell stories of teenagers driven to the brink by bullying, some even resorting to violence as a response to their pain. While Carrie's powers are a supernatural element, her story taps into the very real human emotions of anger and shame and a desperate desire for justice. King's work challenges readers to consider how bystanders, educators, and even communities contribute to these tragedies, whether through direct action or silent complicity. By framing these issues in a horror context, Carrie allows readers to confront them from a safe distance while still grappling with the emotional weight of the narrative. It's a reminder of the importance of empathy, intervention, and fostering environments where every Carrie feels seen and supported, rather than alienated and dehumanized. And this really lends itself in how Carrie forces readers to sympathize with someone who ultimately becomes a monster. Carrie's transformation from a meek, tormented girl into a harbinger of destruction is horrifying, but it's also deeply tragic. Her actions, while extreme, are entirely understandable given the unrelenting torment she endures at school and at home. She just never gets a break. King's ability to humanize Carrie, even as she wreaks havoc, is part of what makes the story so impactful. Through Carrie, King explores the psychological toll of cruelty and isolation. She's a victim of systemic bullying, parental abuse, and societal indifferences. Forces that compound until they erupt in catastrophic violence. This duality, Carrie is both victim and perpetrator, forces readers to confront their own feelings about accountability and justice. Can we entirely blame her for her actions, or do the people who pushed her to the edge share in the burden? This moral ambiguity makes Carrie more than just a horror story. It's a deeply human one. By showing us the world through Carrie's eyes, King makes her pain palpable. Readers can't help but empathize with her, even as they recoil from the devastation she causes. It's a testament to King's skill that he turns the classic monster archetype on its head, presenting Carrie as a figure shaped by her environment rather than inherently evil. In doing so, King also challenges readers to examine their own behavior. How often do we dismiss or overlook the suffering of others? How complicit are we in creating the conditions for someone like Carrie to lash out? These questions linger long after the final page, making Carrie a story that continues to provoke thought and discussion decades after its publication. And before we move on, I want to touch on religion in Carrie, because it's not just a background element, it's the driving force that shapes the protagonist's psyche and sets much of the story's tragedy in motion. Margaret White's extreme religious fanaticism is not portrayed as mere eccentricity, but as an oppressive, destructive ideology that defines her relationship with her daughter. Margaret's worldview is built on fear and sin, and she uses religion as a tool to control and punish her daughter. And this ultimately isolates Carrie from any semblance of normal life. What makes Margaret's fanaticism particularly chilling is its dual nature. On the surface, her actions seem to stem from a misguided desire to protect Carrie from the evils of the world. However, beneath that lies a pathological need for dominance and an inability to reconcile her own guilt and shame. Margaret projects her insecurities and failures onto Carrie, and she treats her as both a scapegoat and a vessel for divine judgment. This creates a suffocating environment that stunts Carrie's emotional growth and contributes to her eventual breakdown. The religious imagery, it's not a source of protection. It's there to amplify the horror. From the constant invocations of hellfire and damnation to the disturbing crucifixion scene at the climax, King uses Margaret's belief to create a sense of dread and an inevitability. The irony is that Margaret's efforts to control Carrie in the name of religion are ultimately what unleashes the very sinful power she fears, and this leads to destruction on a biblical scale. On a broader level, Carrie critiques the dangers of religious extremism and blind faith. Margaret's inability to see her daughter as a human being rather than a vessel of sin serves as a cautionary tale about the consequences of a religious uncompromising ideology. The novel forces readers to confront the question of, how much harm is done in the name of righteousness, and how often is that harm justified by those who inflict it? But Carrie is about more than just its plot and thematic elements. Its narrative style is a significant part of what makes it special. King presents the story through the combination of traditional storytelling and a pseudo-documentary format, and this includes fictional news articles, court reports, and eyewitnesses' accounts. This framing device lends to a sense of realism to the story, making it feel almost like a historical account rather than a work of fiction. It was a bold and innovative choice, especially for a debut novel, and it's a technique King would refine and revisit throughout his career. Carrie is not just good, it's foundational. As a debut novel, Carrie did exactly what it needed to do. It introduced a fresh, confident voice in horror while delivering a gripping and unflinching story. It's not perfect, but that's kind of part of its charm. The rawness and experimentation reflect a writer finding his voice, and that authenticity is what makes it resonate. What's remarkable is how well it holds up, even after 50 years. King tapped into something primal and universal, the pain of being an outsider, the terror of unchecked power, and the devastating consequences of cruelty. These themes are timeless, and King's exploration of them feels as relevant today as it did in the 1970s. And then there's the scope. Unlike the intimate horror of something like Rosemary's Baby or The Exorcist, Carrie explodes outward. It's not just a personal tragedy confined to a singular household or individual. This is a story where the horror spills into the streets, consuming an entire town. The body count, it's staggering. The destruction is massive, and the chaos feels almost apocalyptic. King transforms a high school girl's revenge into a biblical scale reckoning, making it both deeply personal and universally terrifying. And speaking of messages, let's talk about power dynamics, because Carrie's telekinesis is a double-edged sword. It's her salvation, and it allows her to fight back against her tormentors, but it's also her doom. Her power grows out of her pain, and in the end, it consumes her. This theme of power exacting a price is something King revisits throughout his career, whether it's Johnny Smith's psychic ability in The Dead Zone or Charlie McGee's pyrokinesis in Firestarter. King explores the idea that great power comes with great cost. And in Carrie, this theme is raw and devastating, showing the cost of unleashing all that pent-up rage and despair. I can't talk about how good this book is without mentioning the ambiguity surrounding its endings. It's one of the novel's most haunting moments. After Carrie's devastating rampage, what remains is a shattered town grappling with loss and devastation. But King doesn't spoon-feed readers any sense of closure. Instead, we're left with lingering unease. Do the survivors, those classmates, the teachers, the townsfolk, who either directly or indirectly contributed to Carrie's suffering, do they learn from their mistakes, or are they doomed to perpetuate the same cycles of cruelty and indifference? King skillfully avoids turning the narrative into a moralistic tale. There's no tidy resolution, no hero to swoop in and restore balance. What's left is a profound sense of grief and destruction, with only faint hints of understanding and regret. This ambiguity mirrors real-life tragedies, where communities are often left questioning their role in the events leading up to catastrophic acts of violence. Furthermore, the pseudo-documentary framing adds another layer to this ambiguity. Through fictional interviews and reports, we glimpse a fragmented picture of the aftermath, and it's one that's filled with fear, speculation, and denial. This structure mimics how real-life events are dissected in the media, where there's often a search of singular why, and it overshadows the deeper systemic issues at play. By leaving so many questions unanswered, King challenges readers to reflect not only on the story, but also on our own world. Would we have treated Carrie any differently? Have we learned to recognize and address the underlying causes of such tragedies? Or are we, like the people of Chamberlain, destined to repeat our failures, only with new faces and new names? It's this lingering uncertainty that cements Carrie as a horror story that transcends its genre, and it forces us to confront the uncomfortable truths about ourselves. Ultimately, Carrie is as much about the people around her as it is about Carrie herself. The cruelty of her classmates, the fanaticism of her mother, and the indifference of the townsfolk all play a part in the tragedy. It's a story that forces readers to confront their own complicity in systems of bullying and oppression, making it more than just a horror novel. It's a mirror held up to society. First and foremost, you should read Carrie because it's a cultural touchstone that redefined horror fiction and launched one of horror's most legendary careers. Few debut novels have left such an indelible mark, and Carrie stands as a testament to King's ability to tap into universal fears and societal tensions. This is a story that holds a mirror up to its readers, and it forces us to confront the consequences of cruelty, repression, and vengeance. It's a story that's as relevant today as it was in the 70s. That said, this book is also a fascinating snapshot of its era, and it fits perfectly into the 1970s obsession with the corruption of innocence and religious fanaticism. From Rosemary's Baby to The Exorcist, this was a decade when horror often centered around the perversion of what should be pure and sacred. Carrie amplifies those themes, but what makes it so distinct is the raw emotional power behind its protagonist. A misunderstood, tormented teenager whose descent and destruction feels as tragic as it does terrifying. Second, Carrie is essential for understanding Stephen King's evolution as a writer. It's where you'll find the roots of many of his recurring themes and stylistic hallmarks. The combination of small-town dynamics, personal tragedy, and supernatural horror? Yep, that's Stephen King's bread and butter, and it's here. But more importantly, this book lays the groundwork for the emotional complexity and multi-layered characters that you find in every King novel. It's an early glimpse into how he blurs the line between heroes and villains, and makes us sympathize with even the most destructive forces. Another remarkable aspect of Carrie is how it broke ground for female protagonists in horror fiction. At a time when horror often relegated women to the roles of victims or passive witnesses, Carrie presented a female who is not just a victim, she's not just an anti-hero, she's also the villain. Her transformation from a timid, oppressed girl into the force of destruction challenges traditional narratives, and it introduces a complex character whose empowerment is terrifying. Carrie's journey can be viewed as a metaphor for female autonomy and the fear it often inspires in patriarchal systems. Her telekinetic powers, they symbolize a form of liberation, her ability to take control in a world that constantly seeks to oppress her. But her story also highlights the destructive potential of power when wielded in anger and isolation. And this reflects societal anxieties about female independence and rage. In many ways, Carrie paved the way for other dynamic female characters in horror. Just think about Laurie Strode in Halloween or Danny in Midsommar. These are characters who grapple with trauma and agency in the face of unimaginable horror. While Carrie's story ends in tragedy, her legacy endures as a bold step towards more complex and layered female roles in the genre. By placing a misunderstood teenage girl at the center of its horror, Carrie forces readers to empathize with her struggle while, grappling with the consequences of her actions. It's a testament to King's ability to craft stories that blur the lines between hero, victim, and even villain. And this makes us question our own biases and fears. Finally, if you've only ever seen the movie adaptations, which, quite frankly, let's just only focus on one adaptation because there's only one true adaptation, you're missing out. While the film captures the essence of the story, the book, it provides a richer, more nuanced experience. It delves deeper into the psyche of its characters, and especially Carrie and her mother, offering backstories and motivations that make the narrative even more impactful. The pseudo-documentary style, with its use of fictional articles and reports, gives the story an added layer of realism and makes it feel almost like a case study of tragedy that could have been avoided. In short, Carrie is more than just a horror novel. It's a cornerstone of modern horror fiction and a deeply affecting exploration of the human condition. Now, whether you're a longtime fan of King or you're new to his work, Carrie is a must-read that continues to resonate, challenge, and captivate readers 5 decades after its debut. I can't believe I waited this long to read Carrie, but I'm really glad I did. It's everything people say it is. It's brutal, it's heartbreaking, and it's truly unforgettable. It's not just a debut novel, it's a testament. Stephen King announced himself to the world with this book, and we've all been better and more terrified for it. It's a story about the monstrous effects of cruelty and the power of repression, and the devastating consequences of unchecked rage. King masterfully captures the fragile psychology of adolescence, and the ways societal and familial pressures can transform someone from a victim into a force of destruction. It's this complexity and the emotional depth that have cemented Carrie as a cornerstone of modern horror. If you haven't read Carrie, do yourself a favor and pick it up. And if you have, let me know what you think. How does it hold up for you? Is it a cornerstone of King's career, or do you see it differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments and let's talk about it. Now, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends, your family, and even your enemies. Just not anyone with telekinetic abilities that might be looking for me. And of course, if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button because every subscriber inches me one step closer to taking over the Galaxies. Until next time, take care, keep reading, and I'll see you in the next one.